This section is about the brain and the spinal cord, the central nervous system. The major control center of the central nervous system is the brain. The main job of the brain is to process information. It's constantly changing depending on its interactions with the environment. Sensory experiences change the patterns of the neuron connections, and stem cells in the brain can produce new neurons throughout life. These new cells are mainly in the areas of learning and memory, which makes sense. Large cluster of neurons and other cells make up the spinal cord. It's a communication link between the brain and the rest of the body. It carries thousands of signals at once between the central and peripheral nervous systems. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves that branch out from the spinal cord that connect the brain to different parts of the body. Reflexes are one example of something that's processed in the spinal cord directly. It's a quick automatic response to a stimulus. The cerebrum is the largest part, the top part, the dome of the brain. It's the largest part of the brain. It's responsible for voluntary activities of the body. It's the site of intelligence, learning, and judgment. There's a groove that separates the cerebrum into left and right hemispheres, and those hemispheres are connected by the corpus callosum. For the most part, each hemisphere deals with the opposite side of the body, so sensations from the left side of the body go to the right hemisphere, and those from the right side go to the left hemisphere. Commands to move muscles are generated in the same way. So the left hemisphere will control the muscle action on the right side of the body. There are lobes as part of each hemisphere. The 4 lobes are named for the skull bones that cover them. So the frontal lobe is, the job is evaluating consequences, making judgments, and forming plans. That's right up here, just like it sounds, at the front of the brain. The temporal lobe is associated with hearing and smell. It's right here on the side, right by the structure on the side of our heads called our temples. Here's the occipital lobe in the back. That's associated with vision. So the optic nerve goes straight to the back of the brain. And then the parietal lobe in the top back corner, I guess you'd say, of the brain is associated with reading and speech. The cerebrum has 2 layers. The outer layer is called the cerebral cortex, and this is packed with what's called gray matter. Processes information from sense organs and controls body movements. Folds and grooves, called sulci, S-U-L-C-I, increase the surface area, and so increase the amount of brain there actually is. The inner layer is called white matter, and the white color comes from the myelinated axons. They can connect different areas of the cerebral cortex, or they can connect to the cerebrum to other areas of the brain, such as the brainstem. But remember that myelin insulates and makes nerve impulses travel faster. So those areas that are filled with white matter relate to nerve impulses that require a more immediate response. Emotion, behavior, and memory have been linked to many parts of the limbic system. It's deep down in the middle of the cerebrum. The amygdala has been associated with emotional learning, including fear and anxiety, as well as the formation of long-term memories. The limbic system is also associated, so not only with the bad feelings, but the feelings of satisfaction and well-being. So these are more like the primitive sorts of things that are dealt with. Even deeper in the center of the cerebrum are the thalamus and the hypothalamus. They're found between the brainstem and the cerebrum. The thalamus receives messages from the sensory receptors and relays them to the correct region of the cerebrum for further processing. The hypothalamus is the control center for recognition of hunger, thirst, fatigue, anger, and body temperature. The hypothalamus also coordinates the nervous and endocrine systems. The next biggest part of the brain is back here at the back and at the base of the brain. It's called the cerebellum. Information about muscle and joint position, coordination is sent to the cerebellum. Commands to move muscles come from the cerebrum, but cerebellum coordinates and balances muscles and their actions. This is the center of what you'd call muscle memory. If you begin a new activity, the cerebellum learns the movements and coordinates as the movement is repeated. So this is the place that's in charge of the muscle memory. At the top of the spinal cord is the brain stem. It connects the brain and the spinal cord. There are three regions in here: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Excuse me. They regulate the flow of information between the brain and the rest of the body. Blood pressure, heart rate, breathing, and swallowing are all controlled by the brainstem. The brainstem is what keeps the body functioning even when you're not conscious due to sleep or some sort of an injury. Nearly every addictive substance, illegal drugs and legal drugs, such as tobacco and alcohol, affects those brain synapses we were talking about, those gaps between the axon and the dendrite, the axon of one neuron and the dendrite of the next neuron in the pathway. The chemistry of each drug is different, but they change one particular group of synapses that use the neurotransmitter dopamine, and these are associated with pleasure and reward centers. When we engage in an activity that gives us good feelings, neurons in the hypothalamus and the limbic system release dopamine. These dopamine molecules stimulate other neurons across these synapses, and this gives, like I said today, the happiness of well-being, or the feeling of happiness and well-being. Methamphetamine releases a flood of dopamine. It's an instant high. Cocaine keeps dopamine in the synaptic region longer, intensifying pleasure and suppressing pain. Drugs like heroin stimulate receptors elsewhere in the brain that lead to dopamine release. Nicotine and alcohol also cause increased release of dopamine. The brain reacts to excessive dopamine levels by reducing the number of receptors for the neurotransmitter. So normal activities no longer produce sensations of pleasure they once did. Addicts can feel depressed and sick without their drugs. Because there are fewer receptors, it takes larger amounts of chemicals to produce the same high. This results in a deeper and deeper spiral of addiction that's difficult to break. PET scans visualize the density of dopamine receptors in the brains affected by drug addiction. So what you see happening here, you have individuals abusing alcohol and drugs show lower concentrations of dopamine receptors. So on the left-hand side, these are our control subjects, and these are the addicts. The red indicates dopamine receptors, or high concentration of dopamine receptors. So you see a smaller concentration of those in addicts. Your body thinks, well, body's inherently lazy. I'm getting more dopamine, so I don't have to create as many dopamine receptors. I'm going to get rid of these. So there's damage to the brain. Addiction costs the United States billions of dollars in healthcare costs, treatments, property damage, lost productivity. Has a potential for a lot of bad news.